Laptop computer spins onto the screen, opens, and displays ATP Education Program webinar series, closes, and then spins off the screen.
Hello, welcome to the second part of this 8-part series on adoption versus abandonment and the power that we have over influencing this for our students with assistive technology. We're here in part 2 where we are going to discuss abandonment a little bit more in depth. Hello, yet again, this is Sayard Bass. I am a speech pathologist and assistive technology professional. I have my bio right here if there's anything else that you would like to learn about me. So as I said, we're here in section 2 out of 8. This is going to be about 15 minutes where we review abandonment. Now we know we talked a little bit last time about an informal definition of abandonment. When a student's not using something, maybe they're having difficulty learning something, maybe they're not embracing it independently. But our objectives for this section are first to identify 2 ways that the device can impact the abandonment, as well as 2 ways that AT services can impact abandonment of that device. So abandonment, of course, is what we want to avoid. And we know that technology changes so quickly that sometimes what we have for a student one year might not be the best tool for them in the next year. I know when I've cleaned out, an assistive technology closet, when I've come to new jobs, I found everything from, Palm Pilots circa 1998. We know that technology changes and it definitely might not work or be serviceable or be fixable after a certain point. But the abandonment that we see with assistive technology has some different factors that can play in. There are 2 main studies that I like to reference when discussing abandonment. One is all the way back from 1993 by Phillips and Zhao, as well as a more recent project conducted at the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee in 2016. I like the way that this is broken down just in these 2 sections. Phillips and Zhao said, okay, when we're looking at abandonment of devices, and they were looking mostly at people through a medical model, so not so much as we see in schools. And what they found through surveying was that devices were abandoned because the user's opinions were not considered. It wasn't easy to get a hold of the device didn't perform well, or there were changes in the user's priorities. Maybe for a user, something is really important, like I want to be able to access a certain activity. Yet as the user gets older, or as their function changes, they might decide that that activity is not something that they're really drawn to anymore. So why continue using the tool? We come forward 23 years. And in the Adams project, the way that they defined this is more as device discontinuance. You can see that they did divide it into the device characteristics versus service provision. And then that breaks down into the different social aspects, personal factors, health status, economic factors, the physical environment, and then even further down to demographics, the counter effects of the equipment, alternative solutions, and device loss. So it's a much larger list of factors, though they do go down towards matching over with the things that we saw all the way back in 1993. So when we talk about abandonment, we have a few different factors that play in personally. I know that I'd worked in a high school for a while, and I think it was a great place to start out as an assistive technology coordinator because high schoolers are notoriously fickle. They really like to please the people that they're working with, but at the same time, they're really going to go off and do what they're going to do. I had a student who really benefited from using speech to text, text to speech, and a calculator, but she wanted nothing to do with it. She didn't want to look different from her peers. She didn't like the voices that were available to her. She didn't want to be wearing headphones when no one else was. And she didn't want to leave the room to record, but she also didn't want to be talking in a room where everybody else was expected to be quiet. All of those personal factors played into her not using her assistive technology. The personal factors there were the main issue. We didn't see a student who was saying, I don't know how to use this or I can't use this. It was more, I'm choosing not to use this because it's making me look different. And high school is a place where this is really highlighted. So when evaluating her for assistive technology, definitely her opinions played in heavily. when we look at students nowadays, if we give them old equipment, large equipment, something that sticks out, it's definitely going to have an impact on how they see themselves and how they see themselves using that equipment. And you have to listen, because kids, even though I said the high schoolers can sometimes be people pleasers, they sometimes will be very honest with you. I will very bluntly say to a student after an evaluation, hey, tell me what you think of this tool. And by the way, it's okay to tell me if you think it sucks. And I will use that terminology, even though it's not professional. And what I would use maybe in a clinical setting, I found that it does allow the students to feel that they can express whatever opinion they have. Because if they decide what I gave them, quote unquote, sucks, they're telling me right away that they're not going to be adopting that technology, that it's likely to sit off to the side. You have to know that your stakeholder feels comfortable enough with you to be open and tell you if they're going to use it or not. And you have to let them get in on the implementation. With this high schooler, we found some strategies that could work around to get her to accept some technologies, but it really took bringing her into the implementation plan and the decision-making process. You also have to think about how easy it is to get a hold of the device. If something is commercially available, how easy is it to repair? How long does it take to get it there and back from the factory, either when you first purchase it or repair it? Is there funding for it? We know that schools are obligated to fund the devices, but sometimes if we fall at the wrong place in the budget cycle, it takes a little bit of finagling to get what we need quickly. And can it be customized? These are all things that can really make or break whether a student is using the device, because it can influence that device not being in the student's hands. An example I have here was there was a tool that a colleague of mine purchased that was made in Sweden. Cool. It did really awesome stuff. Now it's commercially available in the United States, but when it first came out, it was from Sweden. The device stopped working and it was able to be repaired. So my colleague packaged it up and sent it to Sweden in May. Went to the post office, had all these questions about the battery in there. The shipping was kind of expensive. He comes back to his office in August and there's a package sitting there saying no address found. So this device was literally out of the country and made a very long trip back and still was not prepared or repaired for the student. So we really have to keep those things in mind sometimes when we're choosing what tool we use. There's also the idea of having poor performance of the device. There are devices that have a lot of knobs and whistles and customized settings, but we have to think, how easy is it to adjust and make all of those things work? Looking at this here, this was the new WordPress menu. Somebody had posted this online and I thought, okay, this is a good example, because I bet if I sat down and worked on this program for a while, I would know where the things I wanted are, and I would know how to change them. I remember adapting from using Microsoft Word and then moving over to Google Docs. Very similar locations for a lot of things, but I did have to do some searching. But something like this can look very overwhelming to a user. That affects the performance. It's going to take longer for someone to use something. It's going to possibly be more difficult to use, and it might not feel as effective, because if you can do something faster by using a human in your environment or you relying on modifications or accommodations, why go through and learn what every one of these buttons does? Durability, ease of use, and comfort are other things that really can play a factor when you have that device involved. You want to make sure that something is going to be usable by someone for an entire day. I know eye gaze devices are something that I see suggested many times for students who have difficulty with physical access. And yes, that can be 100% appropriate. But if you've never tried to use an eye gaze device before, sit down. You're going to be exhausted after 5 to 10 minutes. And lastly, we have the changes in user priority. I like this statement that I heard: if something doesn't seem hard, how hard do you want to work on it? So if for a student, what we are giving them access to, or what the device is doing, or how the student perceives the disability in their environment, or what hurdles they have to get over, is going to change how hard they're going to work to correct or make that easier for themselves. If it's simply a matter of, hey, I'm passing my classes now, and you're telling me if I learn this tool and put this into place and do this extra work, I'm going to get an A, it might not motivate every student out there. But if you have a student who physically cannot access the environment without their device, they may be more motivated to get in and take on learning something new so that they can access. And also, we do get to the topic of learned helplessness, where if a user knows that, hey, if I sit here and wait long enough, someone's going to come and help me do this, it's almost like they're using the person as assistive technology. So we have to think about the student, the tasks they need to accomplish. Do they really want to accomplish those tasks, as well as the environment that they're in, and if that's really something that they are wanting to access. So the user's priorities are very important with this, and sometimes motivating kids to think about school, especially at certain ages, is extremely difficult and can definitely influence abandonment. So what does abandonment look like? I think the classic for me is finding something with an inch of dust on it in the back of an AT closet. I found some really amazing things. I've seen some awesome examples of different stages of battery corrosion. So it can look like something that's just been pushed on a shelf and completely forgotten about. It also can look like a student exhibiting behavior when they are presented or expected to use whatever assistive technology they have. The student that I referenced earlier, who didn't want to look different from her peers, would usually end up with some kind of behavioral referral to the office for kicking chairs or other small things where she really wasn't hurting anybody, but she was causing a big disruption. With some students with autism, I've seen them, if they're not with the right communication device, definitely having more behaviors where they're throwing, as well as other nonverbal behaviors. And then finally, there's breakage. If you see that student who has the device that's always broken, the thing that's never on the right settings, that's a way that some students show us that this is not the device that they want to use. They're finding some way to either disturb the way it works or to break it entirely. There's a joke in our house that by the age of 35, you should have a box of cables. I did get rid of that this last summer, and my husband was extremely sad. But this is one place to kind of influence that abandonment, is to take a look at what has been abandoned in your organization. What are the things that you are seeing pushed to the side? See if there's something in common there. Is it old technology? Is it something that maybe teachers have not been educated on how to use? Is it bulky? What is the thing that's making that particular device go further and further to the back of your closet? Behaviors? Definitely that learned helplessness is a huge behavior. And I think that if we think about unlearned helplessness, it's so different for each student. We have to find different ways to motivate. This is where I will pull in a social worker sometimes with assistive technology. This is where I'll pull in a BCBA sometimes, even if it's just to pick their brain on what can we do to create a better environment for this student to use their device. And then breakage, very frustrating. Breakage can be temporary, and students can get their device back and go on their merry way. But I will say that one thing that I've seen popping up more on social media especially is the discussion of airline breakage, where wheelchairs are broken because they are not cared for or stored correctly during flights, as well as AAC devices. It seems like at one point in time, I had the numbers memorized for different repair divisions of the different AAC companies because it was never the same student's device each time, but something was always going wrong. And as technology has improved, that's decreased, but there's definitely a lot of moving parts in some assistive technology, and it's not something you can crack open and repair right in your office. You also have the outside factor of the internet. There are many cloud-based technologies at this point, and if the cloud's not working, your student isn't going to be able to participate. That's just where the line is, and who would want to adopt a technology that is not reliable? So we have to make sure that when we're thinking about breakage, we're not just thinking about something being smashed in a pile on the floor. Is it going to be reliable and working for the student? So now that we've discussed abandonment and some of what it looks like, as well as some of the ways that it goes there, what I'd like you to do is take that moment to think about a student who has abandoned their technology, and then try to identify what might have influenced their decision. You can use those charts from Phillips and Zhao as well as UWM and kind of look through some of those reasons. If you have the chance to interview the student, maybe make some suggestions and discuss some of those reasons. And finally, take a look after you've listed out those reasons. Is there anything that we have influence over?
Thank you for watching. For more information on the ATP education program, please visit our website at atp.nebraska.gov/education or email us at atp.education@nebraska.gov.